Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that feels almost cinematic. Imagine yourself stepping into the dusk of an ancient Celtic clearing. The air is heavy with the smell of wood smoke, pine, and damp moss. Twilight has just folded itself around the horizon, and the world is lit only by the flicker of fire. Tall men and women in rough-spun cloaks are arranging logs in a careful circle, coaxing flames to life as though speaking to the wood itself. The chants start low, almost like the rumble of a thundercloud that refuses to announce itself too quickly. And here's the kicker: you probably won. Survive this if you're allergic to pollen, because they're tossing bundles of herbs straight into that fire, and it's filling the night with an aromatic haze thick enough to choke out a hay fever sufferer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments, because I love seeing where you re-listening from. It makes this whole cozy journey feel like a campfire shared across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Celtic healers, or druids, if you want the more Hollywood-sounding title, had an almost magnetic pull to twilight. Sunset wasn't just a transition, it was a stage. In their world, light and dark weren't enemies, but dance partners, and this little overlap in the day carried weight. You'd be standing there, the fire crackling, while these healers threw herbs like mugwort and juniper into the flames. The smoke wasn't just air pollution, it was thought to carry prayers and healing wishes upward. A sort of aromatic text message to the spirit world. Historians still argue whether these bonfires were more about healing the land itself or the people standing around it. But either way, no one could resist the gravity of that glow. The chants carried on like the hum of bees, layering over the snap of sparks. Sometimes the rhythm was a steady drone, almost like the monks you hear in later centuries. Other times it was syncopated, broken into staccato syllables that mimicked bird calls or the rhythm of walking feet. And if you stood in that circle long enough, you'd start to feel as if the ground itself pulsed with it. It wasn't music in the modern sense, it was medicine for the spirit, woven into sound. Of course, not every healer agreed on what belonged in the flames. One fringe tradition insisted that throwing in animal bones released ancestral energy, while another mocked that as superstition and stuck to herbs. You can picture them squabbling quietly near the fire, their cloaks rustling, one muttering something like, "Yes, let's all choke on burning femur dust." Brilliant idea. It makes you realize, even then, medicine wasn't one neat consensus. It was more like a noisy village potluck, where everyone brought their favorite recipe and judged everyone else. The bonfires also served a practical role. Light in a dark world. Imagine living in the damp green shadow of Northern Europe. No street lamps, no glowing phone screens. Fire was warmth, safety, and visibility rolled into one. People brought their sick to these gatherings, sometimes laying them close to the flames, in the hope that the smoke and heat might push away fevers. There are scattered folk stories about mothers carrying feverish children around the fire 3 times, chanting softly, then handing them back to the healer with the quiet hope that the illness would flee like a spooked animal. You can almost feel it if you close your eyes. The circle of flickering figures, the heat brushing your face, the scent of crushed herbs rising in waves. And behind that, the eerie silence of the Celtic forest, broken only by the occasional cry of a night bird. The fire became not just a stage, but a boundary line. Inside the ring of light, you were safe. Outside, shadows stretched like lurking creatures, That tension, the sense that the fire kept both illness and danger at bay, was part of the medicine. There's a quirky tidbit buried in Roman writings about the Celts. One observer noted with thinly veiled annoyance that the locals seemed to believe fire could literally chase away rats, fleas, and disease in general. He scoffed, but ironically, modern science backs a tiny piece of it. Smoke from certain herbs actually repels insects. So, while the Celts might not have had clinical trials to back up their bonfires, their rituals weren't just woo-woo. They were low-key pest control with a mystical flair. But here's where things get even stranger. Those chants, they weren't random. Some healers passed them down verbatim, like recipes you dare not tweak. Others improvised, believing the true power came from the healer's breath at that moment, shaped by mood and moonlight. Imagine two healers, side by side, one chanting the same syllables his grandmother taught him, the other belting out something new and unrecorded, both insisting theirs was the right way. Historians still argue whether this oral tradition was strict or fluid. But the arguments themselves tell you that medicine, even in ancient times, was never static. And speaking of arguments, fire wasn't always about healing people. Sometimes the healers aimed higher, literally. They believed these great fires could heal the earth, blessing fields and animals. Farmers would drive cattle through the smoke to protect them from disease. A smoky livestock car wash, if you like. It's easy to picture a weary farmer squinting at his cow and muttering, "There, Bessie, you're cleansed. Now, don't drop dead on me this winter." The humor is modern, sure, but the ritual was deadly serious. You might think these twilight ceremonies were rare, but they happened often enough to weave into the fabric of daily life. They weren't once-in-a-lifetime spectacles. They were seasonal checkpoints, aligning human bodies with the larger rhythms of land and sky. The healers were both doctors and stage managers, making sure the audience, meaning the village, felt part of the drama. One mainstream historical fact worth tucking under your blanket. Julius Caesar himself, in his famous writings, commented on Celtic druids and their rituals. He wasn't here exactly unbiased. Romans loved painting others as exotic, but his notes are one of the reasons we even know about these firelit gatherings. He described them as both terrifying and fascinating, though, let's be honest, Caesar thought just about everything outside Rome was barbaric unless it involved good wine. So here you are, standing in the orange glow, your cheeks warm, your ears filled with murmuring chants. A healer drapes a garland of herbs over your shoulders. The flames leap higher, casting sparks into the sky, and for a moment you feel the edge between the human and the other world blur. It's not a performance. It's not just medicine. It's belief, wrapped in smoke and song, feeding both body and soul. And as the fire burns down to embers, you realize this was only the beginning of the healer's art. The night doesn't end here. It stretches into the quiet, waiting to show you the roots, leaves, and hidden brews that shape the next step of their world. The embers from that twilight fire are still glowing in your mind as the night stretches forward. You follow the healers as they leave the circle, stepping carefully along narrow paths that thread through damp grass and tangled roots. Their destination isn't another fire, but a quieter place. The herb plots and hidden baskets where the real daily work of healing begins. If the fire was a stage, the herbs are the script. You notice woven pouches, carved wooden bowls, and clay jars carefully stored in shallow pits or tucked beneath stones. Each container holds something green, brown, or brittle. The healers crouch and start sorting roots, leaves, and stems, murmuring as they go. It's not just idle chatter, it's an oral inventory. The way they remind themselves and their apprentices what's what. You hear names rolling off their tongues like a list of dinner ingredients, though the stakes are far higher than flavor. A sprig of yarrow here, a slice of willow bark there. A sprig of mistletoe hung carefully so its potency doesn't leak away too quickly. The Celts were, in a sense, pharmacists of the forest. They didn't have shelves of glass bottles, but they had mental libraries and long memories. The herbs weren't random. Yarrow, for example, was prized for stopping bleeding. Willow bark, as you might know, contained salicin, the same chemical family that eventually gave us aspirin. Historians still argue whether Celtic healers understood its pain-relieving properties through trial and error or through some deeper symbolic reading of the plant. Either way, when someone staggered into camp clutching a wound, they reached for willow without hesitation. And it wasn't just the big, heroic plants. They collected nettles, which might sting your hand, but were boiled into teas that soothed aching joints. Mugwort, bitter and aromatic, was used in smoke rituals and tucked into pillows to spark vivid dreams. Meadowsweet, with its delicate blossoms, eased fevers and stomach aches. Imagine being the patient, here lying on a bed of woven reeds, the healer leaning over you with a bundle of flowers that look innocent enough, but whose leaves carry the power to numb pain. It's worth pausing for a quirky tidbit. Some healers were known to mix remedies with honey, not just for taste but for preservation. Honey, with its natural antibacterial properties, was their version of refrigeration. So yes, your ancient Celtic cough syrup may well have been a sticky, sweet concoction that doubled as dessert. The downside? Once you realized it tasted good, you'd have to resist the urge to fake another cough just to get a spoonful. But herbs weren't only about ingestion. Many were burned as incense, crushed into poultices, or even carried as charms. You might see a healer smearing mashed herbs onto a wounded soldier's arm, wrapping it with linen strips that had been washed in river water. Or they'd boil herbs into steamy infusions, draping blankets over the patient so they inhaled the vapors. Think of it as a prehistoric spa treatment, with fewer cucumber slices and more ominous chanting. The process of gathering these plants was ritualized. A healer wouldn't just stroll into the meadow, grab handfuls of whatever, and call it a day. No, there were rules. Some plants could only be gathered at dawn, when dew still kissed the leaves. Others had to be cut with a sickle made of bronze or even gold, never iron, because iron was thought to offend the spirits of the land, and mistletoe, that sacred parasite, had to be cut with utmost ceremony, sometimes harvested from oak trees while a white-clad druid chanted beneath. You can imagine the drama of that villagers craning their necks, watching the healer ascend, knowing the sprig he cut wasn't just a plant but a fragment of magic. This was where apprenticeship mattered. Young healers followed their elders like shadows, memorizing which plants healed, which poisoned, and which did both depending on the dose. The danger was real. Too much foxglove, and you weren't curing a heart condition, you were flatlining the patient. It was a tightrope walk, and you can almost hear a grizzled druid muttering to a nervous apprentice. Measure carefully, or the cure becomes the curse. The scholarly debates come in here, too. Some argue that Celtic healing knowledge was shockingly advanced, almost proto-scientific. Others dismiss it as superstition, insisting they stumbled into results by accident. But the survival of these herbal traditions, echoes of which linger in European folk medicine, even today suggests they knew exactly what they were doing. At least well enough to keep people alive more often than not. There's also an aesthetic element to all this. The plants weren't just medicine, they were symbols. Holly for protection, oak leaves for strength, ivy for endurance. Wearing a wreath wasn't a fashion statement, it was a walking prescription. A warrior crowned with oak wasn't just showing off. He was signaling his body carried the resilience of the tree. The symbolism wove into the practical, making medicine a kind of poetry. Picture yourself lying near the healer's hut as night deepens. The air smells of crushed herbs and smoldering ash. A healer kneels beside you, grinding something in a mortar with rhythmic, almost hypnotic movements. He mixes it with honey, lifts the spoon to your lips, and you swallow. The taste is sharp, earthy, faintly sweet. You cough. He nods, and then he places a sprig of mugwort under your blanket for good measure. Is it placebo? Maybe. But when belief is half the battle, the ritual becomes part of the cure. And let's not forget the role of alcohol. Mead and ale weren't just for feasting, they were carriers for tinctures. Drop a root into fermented honey, let it steep, and suddenly your celebratory drink doubles as pain relief. Though, let us be honest, sometimes the medicine was just an excuse to drink more mead. A Celtic patient might have been only half cured, but at least they were too tipsy to complain. These healers lived in two worlds, one of practical trial and error, and one of deep symbolism. Their medicine cabinet wasn't just filled with roots and leaves, it was filled with meaning. Every plant came with a story, a ritual, and a set of invisible strings tying it to gods, spirits, and the cycles of nature. And as you lie there, half lulled by the warmth of the potion and the crackle of the dying fire outside, you realize this wasn't science versus magic. It was both seamlessly braided together. And tomorrow, when dawn breaks and light washes over the land, you'll be taken to a stone circle where those herbs and chants transform into something even stranger. A theater of stone, where healing meets myth. The morning creeps in, pale and slow, as if reluctant to disturb what the night left unfinished. You find yourself following the healers toward a rise in the land, where dark silhouettes of standing stones cut against the mist. At first glance, the circle looks like just a collection of oversized boulders abandoned by glaciers. But as you get closer, the air feels different charged, as though the ground itself remembers every footstep and every chant that has passed here. These aren't just stones, they are stages, witnesses, and instruments in the healer's work. The circle itself is wider than you expect, big enough for dozens of people to stand shoulder to shoulder around its edge. Each stone is weathered, flecked with lichen, some towering like frozen giants, others hunched like old men. The healers lead you into the heart of this arena, and you notice the acoustics immediately. Even a low cough bounces off the surfaces, folding back in on itself. A whisper can travel farther here than it should. It feels like the stones are listening, and, more unsettling, like they might answer back. The healers know this trick of sound well. They use it deliberately. A chant that might sound small in a hut becomes a rolling wave here. Picture them arranging their patients in a circle, each seated or lying close to a stone, while the healer stands in the center and begins to hum. The tone rises, swells, and suddenly the stone picks it up, amplifies it, throws it back like a chorus. For someone weak or feverish, that sound could feel like a blanket, thick and inescapable, wrapping their body in vibration. Historians still argue whether the Celts built these circles with acoustics in mind, or if they simply stumbled into the effect and adopted it. Some say it was intentional, pointing out alignments with solstices, lunar phases, and even natural resonances. Others shrug and say people in damp climates will always find big rocks and declare them sacred. The debate doesn't change the experience, though. Standing here, the sound alone convinces you something more than coincidence is at play. The ceremonies held here weren't one-size-fits-all. Some were grand, tied to seasonal festivals, with whole communities gathering at dawn or dusk. Others were small, intimate, just a healer, a patient, and a few silent witnesses. Imagine lying at the base of a stone, feverish and trembling, while your healer chants above you. The stone rises behind like a guardian, soaking in your breath. The healer sprinkles crushed herbs onto a shallow fire pit in the center, and the smoke curls upward, staining the air with bitter scents. You cough, inhale, cough again, and somewhere in that rhythm, the healer declares the sickness is lifting. Quirky tidbit: some stones were believed to sweat or weep moisture at certain times of year, and that water was collected as medicine. Villagers would scrape tiny droplets from the crevices and feed them to the sick, convinced it carried the stone's strength. Modern scientists might smirk, pointing out it's just condensation, but to a Celt, it was a literal blessing from the earth. You can imagine an apprentice carefully holding a clay cup beneath a dripping stone, waiting hours for just enough liquid to call it a cure. But not every ritual was so gentle. There were harsher moments when the healer's role blurred with priest or judge. Picture this: a patient accused of carrying not just sickness but a curse. They're placed in the circle, surrounded by brands. The healers chant louder, faster, as if driving something invisible out. The patient is pressed to touch the cold stone with bare hands, the idea being that the affliction would pass into the rock, leaving the body cleansed. Did it work? Maybe only in the mind. But belief is a potent medicine. And here, in the charged hush of the stone circle, the line between mind and body was paper thin. You might wonder, why stones at all? Why not a clearing, or a hut, or just the fires? The answer lies partly in permanence. Plants wilt, fires die, but stones endure. To perform a ritual here was to plug into something bigger, something eternal. The healer wasn't just mixing herbs. They were linking the patient to the rhythm of earth and sky. The stone became a mediator, a reminder that healing wasn't about quick fixes, but about harmony with forces that outlast any one body. And then there's the alignment with the heavens. On certain mornings, the sun would slide between two stones, flooding the circle with light. On certain nights, the moon would crown the tallest stone like a halo. The healers timed their ceremonies to these moments, believing celestial rhythms amplified earthly remedies. It's one thing to drink willow bark tea. It's another to drink it at the exact hour the moon swells full over the stones, while chants reverberate like thunder. To them, the timing made the medicine complete. Here's a mainstream fact tucked inside this mist. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of ash and burnt bone within some stone circles. Theories swirl: were these sacrifices, funerary rites, or healing fires? No one knows for certain. But the presence of both human and animal remains suggests the circles doubled as spaces of life and death. To the Celts, healing wasn't separate from mortality. It was part of the same continuum. Sometimes the circle saved you. Sometimes it sent you onward. And yet, these rituals were never purely solemn. Imagine a Beltane night in the circle, fires blazing, villagers laughing nervously as they leap between flames for health and fertility. Children run barefoot around the stones, while elders clap in rhythm. The healer moves among them, sprinkling herbs into the fire, watching smoke wrap itself around their dancing forms. It's medicine, yes, but also community theater. Everyone participates. Everyone leaves a little soot-stained, a little dizzy, and convinced the year will be healthier than the last. The skeptics, then and now, might scoff. Was it placebo? Was it just smoke and mirrors, literally? But stand here in the center of the circle. Let the hum of the chants roll around you. Feel the stones pressing silence against your back, and ask yourself if belief alone could be that heavy. Maybe it didn't matter whether the circle healed or not. What mattered was that people believed it could. As the mist begins to lift, the stones fade back into their ordinary stillness. The healer gathers their herbs, pats the cold surface of a boulder like thanking an old friend, and signals it's time to leave. You step out of the circle, the air feeling thinner somehow, as though you've shed something invisible. Ahead lies the path back to the settlement, and with it the chance to see where the next generation of healers are learning these secrets. The apprentices, hidden away, memorizing chants and herbs like students, preparing for exams that never end. You leave the stone circle behind, its echoes still clinging to your ears, and follow the healers down a narrower path. The forest seems denser here, shadows stretching like long fingers across the undergrowth. Ahead, you see the faint glow of a smaller fire knot, a great communal blaze this time, but a tucked-away hearth surrounded by a cluster of young faces. This is where the druids keep their apprentices, half hidden from the village, training them slowly, quietly, as if knowledge itself were a guarded treasure. The apprentices are a strange mixture of excitement and exhaustion. You can see it in the way they hunch over their baskets, repeating plant names under their breath as though afraid they'll forget the difference between harmless nettle and deadly hemlock. Their instructors pace around them, cloaks swishing, voices calm but sharp. A mistake here isn't like fumbling your homework. A mistake could kill someone. The training starts with memory. No parchment, no ink, no books to flip through when you're unsure. Every word, every chant, every dose must live in the mind. Oral tradition is the backbone of this world, and the healers drill it into their students with relentless patience. You watch as one apprentice closes his eyes and recites a chant, each syllable rising like a bead on a rosary. Another mutters the properties of 20 different roots, rocking gently as though the rhythm itself helps the facts stick. It's not rote learning, it's survival. Historians still argue whether Celtic healers truly had the staggering memories ancient writers claimed. Some say they studied for 20 years before becoming full druids. Imagine that. 2 decades of memorizing chants, omens, plants, and rituals, all without writing a single word down. A university degree suddenly feels like a weekend workshop in comparison. And yet, the evidence of this oral discipline lingers. Later, bards and storytellers in Ireland, for example, carried epics, thousands of lines, long entirely in memory. So maybe the claim isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. The apprentices also learn to chant not just the words, but the tones, the cadence, the rise and fall of breath. A healer's chant isn't supposed to sound like a casual hum. It's a performance, half song, half command, something that persuades not only the patient, but the unseen spirits hovering nearby. An instructor corrects one apprentice who's mumbling too softly. "Speak as though the stones themselves must remember your voice," he says. And the boy straightens, raising his volume until the fire itself seems to lean toward him. Quirky tidbit: some sources hint that apprentices were tested by being left alone in dark groves, forced to spend the night memorizing or chanting while surrounded by the sounds of owls, foxes, and wind through the branches. The idea was that if fear could break your concentration, you weren't ready. You can almost picture a trembling student whispering lines about oak bark while an owl screeches overhead, trying desperately not to lose the rhythm. It's like the ancient equivalent of practicing your speech while your roommate blasts heavy metal in the background. Of course, not every lesson is mystical. Practical skills take center stage. 2. Apprentices learn how to grind herbs with a mortar, how to measure a dose by finger lengths or handfuls, how to set a broken bone with steady pressure. You watch as one student fumbles with a strip of linen, trying to tie it around a dummy's splintered arm. The teacher scolds, then demonstrates, tight enough to hold, loose enough to allow blood flow. Medicine here isn't just about pleasing the gods, it's about keeping people breathing. The hierarchy is strict. Apprentices obey, observe, and keep silent unless spoken to. If an elder says mistletoe must be cut at dawn with a golden sickle, no one dares argue about metallurgy. Belief, discipline, and repetition are the pillars of their education, and yet you sense a quiet thrill among them. To be an apprentice is to stand with one foot in the ordinary world and the other in the hidden one. They are outsiders in training. The ones who know secrets others can't. Mainstream fact time. Pliny the Elder, the Roman writer, described druids cutting mistletoe from oak trees while dressed in white robes, surrounded by ceremonies. He might have embellished Romans, loved a good dramatic sign, but his description lines up with the sense of solemn ritual we glimpse here. Whether every healer did it or not, the image of the robed druid harvesting mistletoe became iconic, a symbol of sacred medicine passed down in whispers. But the apprentices don't just learn plants and chants. They learn how to carry themselves, how to project authority, how to silence doubt with posture alone. You see one young woman practicing the tilt of her head as she chants, eyes half closed, hands raised just so. Her instructor corrects her wrist angle, as if the very pose matters to the medicine. And maybe it does. Patients believe not just in herbs, but in the person delivering them. Confidence becomes its own ingredient in the cure. Some students struggle. A boy mispronounces a syllable and gets a sharp smack on the shoulder. Another fails to identify a root in the basket and is sent to spend the night fasting. These aren't cruel punishments so much as reminders that every slip could cost a life later. The healers carry the weight of their community, and apprentices must feel that burden pressing down from day one. You can imagine the gossip around the village. Parents whisper about whose child is being trained, whether they'll return proud or broken. Some never finish the years are long, the discipline grinds them down. Others emerge hardened, carrying chants and remedies like weapons. When they return, villagers greet them with awe and a little fear. After all, who else can cure a fever with one hand and curse your harvest with the other? As you watch the apprentices huddled by the fire, their faces lit gold, you realize this hidden training is the backbone of Celtic healing. The fire rituals and stone circles might dazzle the eye, but without generations of apprentices memorizing every herb, every chant, the knowledge would vanish. It's a fragile system, held together by memory alone, and you wonder how much has already been lost. The night deepens again. The apprentices finish their chants, bow to their teachers, and roll into rough blankets. You step away quietly, the echo of their voices fading behind you. Ahead, you hear the faint trickle of water, the promise of springs and wells where healing takes a different form through fire or chant, but through the flowing, shimmering element that carries memory of its own. The path bends downward, and the sound of water grows stronger. It begins as a faint trickle, then a steady rush, until you emerge from the trees into a clearing where a spring bubbles up from the earth. The water sparkles in the dim light, impossibly clear, sliding into a shallow pool rimmed with moss and stone. The healers gather here with quiet reverence, as though approaching not a resource but a living presence. To them, this is no ordinary spring. It is sacred water that remembers, water that heals. You can feel the hush settle over the apprentices trailing behind. They lower their heads, as if afraid to look too directly at the surface. The master healer kneels, dips a wooden cup into the flow, and holds it high before drinking. It's not thirst being quenched, it's communion. The act itself carries meaning, reminding everyone that water is more than liquid. It's a channel between worlds, carrying whispers from gods, ancestors, and the earth itself. Rivers, wells, and springs were woven deeply into Celtic ritual life. Villagers brought their sick to bathe, to drink, or simply to sit near the flow, hoping the water's endless motion would carry illness away. Imagine a mother guiding her feverish child to the pool, dipping a cloth and pressing it to his forehead. The child winces at the cold, then relaxes, while the healer murmurs that the spring's spirit has accepted his suffering. Historians still argue whether these springs were chosen for practical reasons. Mineral-rich waters with genuine curative properties or purely symbolic ones. Modern science has tested some ancient sites and found elevated levels of iron, sulfur, or salt. In other words, the waters may have had a genuine medicinal effect. But whether or not the Celts knew the chemistry, they believed the cure flowed from spirit as much as substance. Quirky tidbit, coins, weapons, and even small statues have been found at Celtic water sites. Offerings left to the gods who dwelled in the depths. People tossed valuables into wells, knowing they'd never see them again, as payment for healing or protection. Imagine standing on the bank with your last bronze brooch, fingers trembling as you drop it into the water. The ripples carry it away, and with it, your prayer. The water became a treasure chest of human hopes, each coin a tiny whisper sealed under its surface. The apprentices lean in to watch as their master demonstrates ritual washing. He cups water, sprinkles it over a carved stone, then over his patient's hands, then finally lets it fall on the ground. As the water flows, he says, so flows the sickness. You notice how deliberate the movement is. Every gesture slowed to a crawl, as though speed might shatter the spell. Patients themselves were often told to drink slowly, savoring each sip, believing the pace itself was part of the medicine. The wells carried their own legends. Some were said to be guarded by spirits who demanded respect. At certain sites, you couldn't draw water without first leaving a small offering, a scrap of cloth, a bead, a piece of food. Even today, in some corners of Europe, you can find clouty trees near holy wells. Branches heavy with fabric strips left behind by visitors seeking healing. It's a thread stretching back to Celtic practice. Tie your illness to the cloth, leave it for the water spirit, and walk away lighter. The healers knew the power of place. Not every spring was sacred, but those that were became pilgrimage spots. People traveled miles, carrying sick relatives on carts, hoping that one touch of that water would succeed where herbs had failed. The atmosphere must have been both somber and hopeful. A gathering of strangers united by frailty and belief. Picture dozens of people circling a spring, dipping cups, whispering prayers, clutching charms, while the healers chant just loudly enough to bind the crowd's faith together. There's also an element of timing. Some waters were considered most potent at sunrise, when the first light touched the surface. Others were strongest under a full moon, glowing faintly as if stirred by celestial hands. A healer might refuse to treat you until the right alignment arrived, insisting that water taken at the wrong time was just water. You can almost see the frustration on a farmer's face dragging his limping child across miles of marsh, only to be told, come back when the moon is right. And yet, the rules weren't arbitrary. They gave the ritual weight, embedding healing into the cycles of nature. Mainstream fact: archaeological digs at sites like Bath in England, originally a Celtic shrine before the Romans expanded it, show just how deeply water, worship, and healing overlapped. Thousands of offerings, coins, curses inscribed on lead tablets, personal belongings were thrown into the waters. Some asked for revenge, others for relief from pain, all entrusted to the spring's invisible keeper. You sit by the pool now, watching a healer swirl water with a sprig of mint before offering it to a patient. The taste is sharp, refreshing, earthy, carrying not just hydration but a sense of ritual. The patient sips, then leans back, eyes closing, as though already lighter. Around you, the sound of water doesn't stop, never stops. It runs, it murmurs, it insists that time itself is moving forward, carrying your weakness with it. The apprentices are called forward, one by one, to dip their hands and recite a chant. Some are clumsy, splashing too quickly. Others hesitate, afraid of offending whatever spirit might dwell beneath the surface. Their master corrects them, reminding them that water is both fragile and infinite, easy to disrespect, yet impossible to exhaust. Treat it like breath, he says, and it will treat you in return. As night presses back in, you notice how the fire, smoke, and stone rituals you've already seen now thread seamlessly into water. Each element carries its own role: fire to purge, stone to ground, herbs to soothe, water to cleanse. Nothing stands alone. And as the last apprentice wipes his wet hands on his cloak, you realize the lessons are layering, piece by piece, until they form an entire worldview. The spring gurgles quietly behind you as you rise. Ahead lies another test of Celtic medicine, one less poetic and more practical: the battlefield and the broken body, where healing must act fast and chants compete with the cries of the wounded. The air shifts again as you leave the quiet spring behind. Gone is the soft murmur of water, replaced by something harsher shouts. The clash of wood against wood, the clang of metal, and the unmistakable groan of pain. You've walked straight into a Celtic battlefield, though you don't see the actual fighting. What you see is the aftermath, the domain of the healers when wounds are fresh. Blood is still warm, and lives hang in the balance. Picture the scene. Warriors lying sprawled across the grass, some writhing, others already unnervingly still. Shields lie cracked beside them, spears jut out of the ground, and the air smells of iron and smoke. The healers are here, moving fast, their cloaks hitched up as they crouch, kneel, or lean over the fallen. This isn't the solemn pace of a fire ritual or the hushed reverence of a spring ceremony. Here, speed matters. Here, the healer's chant must keep time with blood flow, every second counting. One man grips a broken arm, twisted at an angle that makes you wince. A healer crouches, presses along the bone with firm fingers, and then the joint is pulled back into place with a practiced yank. The warrior cries out, a guttural sound that mixes pain with relief. The healer mutters words under his breath, not just to calm the patient, but to guide his own hands. The chant is steady, rhythmic, almost like counting beats in a song. It helps him know when to push, when to pull, when to stop. Historians still argue whether Celtic healers were genuinely skilled in bone setting, or whether much of it was improvised. But evidence from skeletal remains shows healed fractures set straight enough to suggest real knowledge. These weren't bumbling attempts. They knew what they were doing, at least well enough to get warriors back on their feet. In a world where survival meant defending your tribe, that knowledge was gold. Quirky tidbit: some healers supposedly spat directly onto wounds after chanting, believing their saliva carried sacred power. To us, it sounds unhygienic at best, revolting at worst. But in their world, a healer's body was itself an instrument. Their breath, voice, and spit were all extensions of power. Whether or not the spit helped is debatable. But hey, When you're bleeding out on a battlefield, you don't exactly get picky about sterilization methods. The apprentices hover nearby, pale-faced but alert, fetching water, ripping strips of cloth, grinding herbs into paste. They smear yarrow to stop bleeding, press moss into wounds to absorb blood, and wrap linen around gashes as quickly as their shaking hands allow. Some patients are lucky the herbs sting but do their work. Others, too far gone, are given strong drinks laced with poppy to dull the pain as life slips quietly away. Even in death, the healer's role isn't finished. They chant softly, sending the warrior spirit on its way, a strange overlap of doctor and priest. Mainstream fact: ancient Greek and Roman accounts mention that Celts used plants like mistletoe and vervain, not just in ritual, but in healing. Roman soldiers who fought against Celtic tribes even noted their enemies' surprising resilience, often attributing it to their strange herbal practices. It's not hard to imagine that a poultice of willow bark or a draught of meadowsweet tea gave them the edge to recover from wounds that might have killed others. There's no glamour here, though you see a healer dragging a young warrior toward the shade of a tree, his leg mangled beyond repair. They tie a tourniquet, then pull out a blade. The chant grows louder, sharper, until before you can look away the leg is gone. The patient screams once, then falls silent, fainting from shock. The healer wipes his blade, presses a poultice of honey and herbs against the stump, and binds it tight. The chant softens, turning almost into a lullaby, as though coaxing the warrior back into his own body. In moments like these, you realize healing is half courage, half compassion, and entirely brutal. What strikes you most is how seamlessly the practical and a mystical blend. A broken arm is yanked back into place with solid, anatomical knowledge, but always with a chant. A bleeding wound is packed with moss and herbs, but also with whispered prayers. The two aren't in conflict. They are two halves of the same act, as inseparable as breath and voice. Sometimes the battlefield itself becomes ritualized. A healer might trace patterns of ash on a warrior's forehead before treating him, as if calling on the gods to lend strength. Another might sprinkle water from a sacred spring over the wounded, believing it would keep infection away. These gestures weren't superstition to them, they were a way of anchoring chaos, of bringing meaning into a world torn apart by blades and arrows. You notice the apprentices growing steadier as the day wears on. At first, they were queasy, hesitant, fumbling with herbs. Now they move more confidently, binding wounds, chanting alongside their masters, even daring to give orders to those carrying the injured. The battlefield, grim as it is, becomes their classroom. Here, lessons aren't abstract, they're written in blood. And still, arguments linger. Some healers swear by hot irons to cauterize wounds. Others insist on cold compresses. Some claim certain chants speed bone knitting. Others laugh and point out that bones take months, no matter how much you sing. Historians still argue whether the chants were medicine or placebo. But standing here, watching men calm under whispered syllables, it's hard to deny their effect. Placebo or not, relief is relief. The cries of the wounded fade as dusk approaches. The healers gather what they can, tending fires to sterilize blades, mixing more poultices, and praying quietly over the dead. There's no triumph here, no celebration, just exhaustion and a grim sense of necessity. Healing is never clean, but here, amid mud and blood, it feels raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. As night falls, the fires dim, and you step away from the scene. Ahead, you catch the silver glow of the moon rising. Its light stretches across the land, cool and steady, promising a different kind of rhythm. Tomorrow, the healers will look up and time their remedies, not by urgency, but by the shifting face of the sky. The battlefield fades behind you, its echoes buried in the grass, and you find yourself standing under an open sky. The moon has climbed higher now, a pale lantern carved against the velvet dark. Its glow silvers the treetops and glimmers across the damp earth, and the healers raise their faces to it as though greeting an old companion. Here begins another layer of Celtic healing, one not grounded in roots, smoke or blood, but in the quiet rhythm of the heavens. To the Celtic mind, the moon wasn't a distant object. It was a clock, a calendar, a prescription pad written in light. Every phase carried meaning. Herbs gathered under the full moon were considered strongest, saturated with the moon's fullness. Roots dug under the waning moon carried purging power, thought to draw sickness out of the body. A patient treated on the night of the waxing crescent might be told that their recovery would grow as the moon grows. This wasn't vague poetry, it was instruction, a reminder that the body was tied to the sky as much as to the earth. You watch as a healer steps into the clearing, holding a bundle of herbs. He lifts them to the moonlight before crushing them, whispering that the plant's spirit will now act in harmony with the sky. The apprentices imitate him, fumbling a little, their chants uneven. But the ritual itself is steady, repeated as it has been for generations. To skip this step would feel as wrong as skipping the fire or water. Historians still argue whether this lunar timing had any measurable effect. Skeptics insist it was symbolic, a way of giving structure to healing practices. But others point out that lunar cycles influence tides, animal behavior, and even human sleep patterns, so why not subtle shifts in plant chemistry or human health? Whether science agrees or not, for the Celts, the connection was unquestionable. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers believed the moon could actually cure warts. Patients were told to rub the wart with a piece of raw meat, then bury the meat under moonlight. As the moon waned, so too would the wart, at least in theory. You can picture a patient awkwardly digging a hole in the dark, muttering to themselves, "Well, here's hoping." Was it effective? Probably not in dermatological terms, but belief is stubborn. If the wart eventually disappeared on its own, the credit went to the moon. The apprentices are drilled in this timing as seriously as they are in chants or herb lore. One elder points at the moon and quizzes them. "What do you harvest tonight?" he demands. One stammers, "Leaves for strengthening." Another blurts, "Roots for cleansing." The elder nods, satisfied, as though they've just passed an exam. In their education, failing to know the moon's meaning was as shameful as misidentifying a plant. Mainstream fact: Celtic calendars, like the Coligny calendar discovered in France, show an intricate system of months divided by lunar phases. These weren't vague guesses. They tracked days with astonishing precision, combining solar and lunar reckonings to mark rituals and agricultural cycles. Healing, tied so closely to agriculture, naturally followed the same clock. Imagine yourself as a patient brought before a healer under the full moon. You lie on a bed of reeds, staring up at the pale disk above. The healer leans over you, chanting softly, placing herbs on your chest. He tells you that as the moon wanes, your fever will shrink. You believe it not because you've read the science, but because you feel the rhythm of nature pressing into you. The chant, the herb, the moon, they're all part of the same treatment. Sometimes ceremonies became theatrical. Whole villages gathered on nights of eclipse, convinced that the moon's disappearance was a moment of immense danger and power. Healers lit fires, chanted frantically, and offered herbs to the flames, trying to coax the moon back. Imagine the fear in those gatherings. the night sky swallowing its familiar companion, leaving people convinced the world was tilting toward ruin. And when the moon reappeared, the relief must have been overwhelming. The healers, of course, were credited with saving it. Their authority only deepened with every restored moonrise. The moon also tied into fertility rituals. Women hoping for children were instructed to bathe in springs beneath the full moon, or to carry herbs gathered under its light. Farmers planted seeds according to lunar phases, believing crops rooted under the waxing moon grew taller and stronger. For the Celts, the cycle of life from birth to harvest was lit by that changing orb. Even the sickest patients were told to wait for certain nights. A healer might refuse to attempt a cure until the moon was right, insisting that the spirit of the illness would resist treatment otherwise. Imagine a man feverish, begging for relief, and the healer shaking his head. 3 nights more. When the moon turns, the cure will take. Frustrating, yes, but when the cure worked, the delay only reinforced the moon's power. You can sense how deeply this rhythm shaped their world. Fire burned, stones stood, water flowed, but the moon kept the beat, marking beginnings and endings. The apprentices glanced skyward constantly now, their eyes trained to read the heavens as easily as herbs. And you realize that for the Celts, healing was never just about the body. It was about aligning body, earth, and sky into a single harmony. As the night drifts on, the chants slow, the herbs are packed away, and the moon slides higher. Its pale light casts long shadows of wolves in the forest, edgereal wolves, their eyes catching the glow, watching from the dark. The healers notice, nodding quietly. For them, animals aren't intruders. They are messengers, guides, sometimes even participants in the healing act. And with that, your path leads toward a new lesson: how birds, beasts, and unseen allies of the forest shape the medicine of the Celts. The moonlight hasn't faded when the forest seems to stir with a new kind of presence. It's no longer just the healers and their apprentices moving between groves and stones. Now, you notice eyes glinting from the underbrush, the rustle of wings overhead, the low pad of paws across the earth. To the Celts, this wasn't coincidence. Animals weren't just background noise, they were omens, allies, even healers in their own right. A healer raises his hand, pausing the group. An owl sweeps low across the clearing, its wings brushing the air without sound. The apprentices whisper nervously. The elder smiles, murmuring, "The owl sees what we cannot." For them, this is no ordinary bird. It's a messenger from the night, a guide whose appearance signals wisdom or, in some villages, death. The interpretation depends on the healer, the timing, and sometimes sheer instinct. You begin to realize their medicine isn't just plants and chants, it's a dialogue with the wild. Historians still argue whether these animal associations were purely symbolic or rooted in observed behavior. Take ravens, for example. They're scavengers, always circling battlefields. To a Celt, their presence wasn't biology, it was prophecy. Ravens meant bloodshed, disease, or death nearby. Wolves, meanwhile, were feared predators, yet also admired for their strength and cunning. A healer might invoke the wolf's spirit when treating a wounded warrior, believing that channeling its resilience would knit the body faster. There's a quirky tidbit from later Irish folklore. Sick children were sometimes measured against animals. A healer would literally compare the child's growth to that of a calf or foal, declaring whether their health would flourish or falter. Imagine being the child, squirming while an adult lines you up beside a bewildered goat. Strange as it sounds, the symbolism mattered. Humans and animals were part of the same cycle, judged by the same vitality. You sit near the fire now as a healer demonstrates how to read animal signs. A hare darts across the path, fast, nervous, good omen, the healer mutters, swift recovery. A dog howls in the distance, and his face darkens. Bad sign, a lingering illness. The apprentices scribble these lessons into memory, even though no parchment records them. Each sight, each sound becomes a note in a vast, unwritten text. Mainstream fact, Celtic art and artifacts are packed with animal imagery, boars carved on shields, stags on jewelry, birds etched into stone. These weren't decorations. They were emblems of power, tied directly to healing, protection, and spiritual balance. To wear a boar amulet wasn't just to show strength in battle. It was to call on the animal's vitality in times of weakness. Sometimes animals were more than symbols. Their parts became medicine. Deer antlers, ground to powder, were mixed into tonics for strength. Bear fat, rare and precious, was rubbed into joints to ease pain. Feathers, bones, and claws were carried as charms against sickness. The line between animal as guide and animal as ingredient blurred constantly. If a bird's presence foretold healing, its feather might carry that same power once woven into a talisman. You can almost hear the debate among healers themselves. One insists the animal's spirit is enough, just seeing the owl is the medicine. Another scoffs, saying the talisman must be crafted, worn, used. Historians still argue whether Celtic healers leaned more toward symbolism or practicality, but the truth likely lived somewhere in the middle. The apprentices, meanwhile, are tested in their ability to notice. One is asked, "What bird did you hear last night?" He stammers, "A thrush." And the master shakes his head. "It was a blackbird." Learn the difference, or you'll miss the message. Their training is relentless, not just in herbs and chants, but in listening, watching, staying alert to a world that never stops whispering clues. You imagine a patient lying feverish in a hut while the healer steps outside to read the signs. A raven croaks in the distance. The healer returns, grave, and warns the family that the illness may claim their kin. Another day, a wren hops near the window, cheerful and small. The healer smiles, declaring recovery certain. To modern ears, it sounds like guesswork, but to the villagers, it was as binding as any diagnosis. And then there are the wolves. Their shadows slink at the forest edge, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. The apprentices shift nervously, but the elder simply nods. "They walk with us tonight," he says. To him, the wolves aren't predators, they're guardians, escorting the group on its journey. He even tosses a scrap of bread toward the trees, a quiet offering of respect. Whether wolves actually lingered as allies or simply circled in hunger, the impression is the same. Their presence had meaning, and the healers knew how to read it. Quieter allies, too, played a role. Bees buzzing near hives symbolized community and harmony. Horses were associated with endurance, often invoked for patients struggling with long illnesses. Even fish swimming in rivers carried lessons, slippery, elusive, tied to cycles of abundance. To live among Celts was to live in a world where every creature, large or small, folded into the medicine of the body and soul. The night thickens, the animals retreat, and the clearing grows quiet again. You sense the apprentices absorbing every detail, their minds weaving animals into the web of herbs, chants, fire, and water they've already learned. Healing, to them, isn't an isolated act. It's part of a vast conversation with the natural world, one in which every feather, pawprint, and howl has a place. As the fire burns low, the elder rises. "Tomorrow," he says, "we return to the festivals, where fire and community become medicine together." You follow, already hearing in your mind the drums, the songs, and the laughter of Beltane and Samhain times when entire villages came together to chase away sickness with smoke, heat, and celebration. The forest thins as dawn begins to pale, and you hear not the quiet of springs or the cries of animals, but something larger. Voices rising together, laughter echoing, the thump of drums carrying through the trees. You step into an open field where the whole village has gathered. Torches blaze, bonfires roar, and the air is thick with heat and smoke. This is no battlefield, no hushed grove. This is festival time. Beltane in spring, Samhain in autumn, when fire itself became both spectacle and medicine. You can feel the difference immediately. The villagers aren't just watching the healers work. They're participants. Children dart around, faces smeared with ash, carrying herbs to throw into the flames. Women with garlands of flowers and herbs, draping them over cattle and tying them to doors. Men leap across low fires, their cloaks snapping, their laughter loud enough to drown the crackle. The healers walk among them, guiding, chanting, correcting, turning chaos into ritual. Beltane, in spring, was all about life fertility, protection, growth. The healers built 2 great bonfires and drove cattle between them. The smoke, acrid and pungent with burning herbs, was thought to shield the animals from disease. Picture an old cow stumbling nervously between 2 roaring blazes, villagers cheering, the healer chanting loudly enough to be heard over the beast's lowing. It wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. A fiery cleansing before summer's pastures. And if a little soot clung to the cattle's hides, even better. It meant the protection would stick. Historians still argue whether these fire festivals were more religious or medicinal. Were they grand rituals to please the gods, or community-wide hygiene projects disguised as theatre? Some say both. Fire, after all, kills parasites and burns away rot. In its smoke, healing and prevention blur into one. Then comes Samhain, at the opposite end of the year. The air is colder. The fires feel sharper. This time, the focus isn't fertility, it's survival. Winter looms, food is scarce, illness waits in the shadows. The healers lead chants to keep spirits at bay, tossing herbs like juniper, mugwort, and sage into the blaze. Villagers circle the fire, clutching charms against their chests, whispering prayers for their families to outlast the cold months. The fire isn't just warmth, it's a ward, a fever cure for the whole community. There's a quirky tidbit about Samhain. Villagers would sometimes light torches from the great communal fire and carry them home to relight their hearths. The idea was that the sacred flames would purify the house and keep illness out. Imagine trudging across the damp night, shielding a tiny flame in your hands, praying the wind doesn't snuff it before you reach your door. A single spark became the thread tying your health to the larger community. The apprentices are everywhere during these festivals. One carries herbs in a basket, feeding handfuls to the flames. Another keeps rhythm on a drum, his beat steady, his face tense with concentration. A third leads children in chants, teaching them words they'll remember for years, embedding healing into play. The elder healers oversee it all, nodding when the rhythm flows, correcting when it falters. To them, this isn't just celebration, it's a training ground, a way to keep the entire community aligned with the cycles of health. Mainstream fact: archaeological evidence shows that at Beltane fires, bones of animals were sometimes burned alongside herbs. Whether as offerings or purification, the combination of bone and plant ash carried significance. And in later folklore, Beltane fires remained a powerful protective symbol well into Christian times. showing just how stubbornly these traditions clung to memory. You watch as a healer prepares a patient-specific ritual, even amid the noise. A young girl, pale and coughing, is led forward by her mother. The healer dips a sprig of rowan in milk, flicks it 3 times over the child's head, and then tosses it into the fire. The crowd falls quiet, watching. The smoke curls upward, glowing red against the dark. The healer assures the mother that the sickness will lift with the rising flames. The girl coughs again, then smiles faintly. The crowd cheers, as though convinced they've witnessed a cure. It's striking how these festivals blend joy and fear. People laugh, sing, leap through flames, but beneath the noise runs a current of anxiety. They're not just celebrating, they're fighting off unseen enemies. Fever, famine, death. The healers harness that tension, turning it into ritual. Each leap through the fire is a symbolic act of protection. Each herb tossed into the flames is a small insurance policy against the unknown. Quirky observation: some accounts suggest healers also walked the edges of these festivals, muttering about who leapt well and who stumbled. A poorly executed leap could be interpreted as bad luck, a sign of illness ahead. You can picture a villager tripping, landing awkwardly, and grimacing as the healer shakes his head. The ritual wasn't just about fire, it was about performance, and every move was judged. As the night deepens, the fire festivals reach their peak. Flames roar high, sparks scatter into the sky like stars breaking loose. The chants swell, the drums pound, and the entire community sways as one. You feel the energy washing over your heat, smoke, laughter, fear, all bound together. It's not individual medicine here, it's collective. A healing of the tribe, not just the body. When the fires finally die down, the air reeks of ash and herbs. The villagers stumble home, soot-streaked, tired but lighter. They believe they've been cleansed, protected, renewed. And maybe they have. For even if the sickness hasn't left, the weight of fear has lifted, replaced by shared faith. And that, in its own way, is as healing as any herb. The healers linger behind, stoking the last embers, whispering thanks to fire and smoke. The apprentices gather round, yawning, soot on their cheeks, still buzzing with the rhythm of the drums. And as dawn creeps in, the fires fade into silence. Ahead lies another layer of the healer's craft, not fire, this time, but sound itself. You'll soon learn how breath, song, and the healing hum could soothe a restless body just as surely as any herb. The field still smells of smoke and ash when the scene shifts again. You follow the healers away from the charred festival ground into a grove where the air is hushed, still vibrating faintly from the chants that filled the night before. Here, there are no bonfires blazing high. Instead, there is breath, the human voice, raw and unadorned, becoming its own medicine. The healers call it the hum, the song, the sound that heals. You settle near a circle of apprentices sitting cross-legged, their heads bowed, their chests rising and falling in rhythm. A master healer stands in the center, eyes closed, humming a single low note. At first, it's just a tone, steady and unremarkable, but then it begins to resonate, weaving into the grove, bouncing off trunks, filling the air with something heavier than sound. One by one, the apprentices join in, each layering their breath over his. The vibration builds, humming through the earth, through your bones, until it feels less like a group of voices and more like the ground itself has begun to sing. To the Celts, sound wasn't just art, it was a tool, a medicine, a weapon even. A healer's chant could soothe pain, drive out sickness, or calm the restless spirit of a patient. The idea was simple but powerful. The body is made of rhythms, heartbeat, breath, the flow of blood. disturb those rhythms, and sickness takes hold. Restore them with steady sound, and healing begins. Historians still argue whether the Celts consciously understood the therapeutic effects of vibration, or whether it was pure ritual. Some point out that modern research shows humming can lower stress, regulate breathing, even stimulate the vagus nerve. Others shrug, insisting the healers were just making noise to impress their patients. Either way, the effect is undeniable. Sitting here, the hum feels like a lullaby stitched into the air. There's a quirky tidbit preserved in later folklore. Some healers claimed that a person's cough could be sung out. The healer would mimic the rhythm of the cough in chant form, gradually slowing it, softening it, until the patient's body unconsciously followed along. Imagine being the patient, half coughing, half laughing, as your healer essentially duets with your lungs. Silly, perhaps, but effective enough to survive as a memory. The apprentices practice different tones, now some high, thin like birdsong, others deep and rumbling. The master paces, listening, correcting, shaping their sound as though sculpting clay. He stops one apprentice who sings too harshly. Soften, he instructs, like water sliding over stone. Another is told to project louder, as though you call across the river. It's less about perfection and more about presence, about carrying intention in the voice. Mainstream fact, Roman accounts mention that Celtic rituals were often accompanied by music, chanting, and rhythmic recitation. While the Romans mocked it as barbaric noise, the consistency of these observations suggests sound was indeed central to ritual practice. Add to that the surviving tradition of bardic poetry in Celtic lands, where long recitations carried both story and healing symbolism. And you see how deeply sound ran in their culture. The healers also use breath directly. Patients with fevers or restlessness are told to lie down while the healer breathes steadily over them. Long exhalations meant to carry the sickness out. Some even describe healers placing mouths near wounds, breathing chants into them as if blowing away infection. Again, modern minds might scoff, but in a world where so much depended on intention, the symbolism of shared breath mattered. It was life passed from healer to patient. You notice how the apprentices struggle not just with pitch, but with endurance. Their faces flush as they hold long notes, veins standing out in their necks. The master reminds them, your voice is your instrument. Strengthen it, or you cannot heal. To practice, they chant while walking, while grinding herbs, even while fasting, training the body to sustain tone through fatigue. It's an art as physical as it is spiritual. Then there's rhythm. The healers use drums, rattles, even the beat of a hand against wood or hide. A patient is rocked gently in time with the rhythm, lulled into trance. Children, especially, are soothed this way. Imagine a feverish child, restless in bed. The healer sits nearby, tapping steadily on a drum, humming softly, until the child's breath slows, eyes flutter, and sleep returns. To the Celts, sleep itself was half the cure. And sound wasn't limited to humans. The forest joined in, birds at dawn, the rustle of leaves, the crash of rivers all were folded into the healer's song. Some chants deliberately mimicked these natural sounds, believing that aligning with nature's voice amplified their power. A healer might whistle like a blackbird or drone like the wind, blending their own rhythm into the world around them. There's a quirky story from later folklore about healers who sang bees into calmness. Supposedly, if a hive was disturbed, a healer could stand nearby and hum until the bees settled. Whether true or not, it reflects the belief that sound bridged human and animal worlds, soothing not just bodies but entire ecosystems. Patients, too, were sometimes encouraged to sing. A woman in childbirth might be urged to chant softly with the healer, syncing her breath and voice to steady pain. A wounded man might be asked to repeat a phrase while his bone was set, giving him something to focus on besides agony. The act of voicing became part of the cure, proof that healing wasn't passive, you had to participate. The apprentices finished their practice, their voices hoarse, their chests heaving. The master nods approvingly. Good, now you know how to still the spirit. Next, you'll learn how to read it. He gestures toward the huts nearby, where smoke curls lazily from chimneys. Within those huts, dreams are read, bones are cast. Smoke is watched tools, not just of healing, but of divination. You realize the healer's world is layered endlessly. Herbs soothe the body, chants steady the breath, fire cleanses the village, water carries memory, and sound stitches it all together. But sometimes the healer needs more than remedies. Sometimes they need answers, and for that they turn to visions, omens, and a flicker of shadows in the firelight. The grove still hums faintly with the echoes of chanting when the healers lead you toward a smaller hut, low-roofed and dim, its doorway brushed with hanging herbs. Inside, the air is thick, part smoke, part damp earth, part something else you can't quite name. This is the healer's hut, a space that feels different from fires or springs or battlefields. Here, the purpose isn't to cleanse or soothe. Here, the healer reads, not books, not scrolls, but signs, dreams, smoke, bones, and shadows, all used to divine the roots of sickness or predict its outcome. The apprentices file in, crouching low, while the master settles at the center. A clay bowl rests in front of him, already smoldering with embers. He tosses a pinch of dried herb into it, mugwort, maybe, or juniper, and the smoke rises in twisting ribbons. The room fills quickly, your eyes sting, and the shapes in the smoke begin to shift, dancing in ways your mind can't quite follow. The healer narrows his eyes, tracing the curls with his finger, murmuring that the smoke reveals not just air, but messages. To the Celts, illness wasn't always mechanical. Sometimes, a fever wasn't just infection, it was a curse, a spirit lodged in the body, or a punishment from unseen forces. Divination became a way to interpret these causes, to decide whether a patient needed herbs, chants, or something deeper. The smoke acted as a veil pulled back, a language that only the healer knew how to read. Historians still argue whether these practices were primarily medical or theatrical. Did the healers genuinely believe the smoke told them something specific? Or was it a performance meant to comfort families, to give meaning to randomness? Whatever the truth, the effect was real. Patients and kin left believing they had answers, and sometimes belief itself was half the cure. Quirky tidbit: some healers tossed small bones or knuckle bones into the smoke, watching how they landed in the ash. A crack here, a scatter there, each pattern was a message. It sounds like fortune-telling, and in a way it was. But to them, those bones weren't dice. They were fragments of once living bodies, carrying whispers of the spirit world. You watch as the master leans over the bowl, the smoke swirling round his face. He mutters that a patient's sickness is stubborn, clinging like ivy. He prescribes both herbs and ritual cleansing. An apprentice asks timidly, "How do you know?" The master simply gestures at the smoke, as if the answer is obvious. The lesson is clear. Part of healing is conviction. The healer must believe what they see, so others will, too. Dreams play a role here as well. Patients are asked about their visions during fever. A woman reports dreaming of blackbirds circling overhead. The healer nods gravely, declaring it a warning her sickness may worsen unless treated at once. Another man describes dreaming of water overflowing a cup. The healer smiles, interpreting it as the body trying to cleanse itself. He prescribes a water ritual at the spring. To us, these are metaphors. To them, they're diagnostics. Mainstream facts. In later Celtic and Irish tradition, vision seekers or seers played central roles, blending medicine with prophecy. Their interpretations weren't considered separate from healing, but part of the same continuum. The sick body and the unseen world were bound together, and you couldn't treat one without acknowledging the other. The apprentices practice as well, though clumsily. One stares into the smoke, two long eyes watering, until he blurts out, "It looks like a bird." The others snicker, but the master hushes them. "Birds speak, too," he says. "Do not mock signs." Another tosses bones into the ash and hesitates, uncertain how to interpret them. The master doesn't correct him. Instead, he says, "Say what you see." The meaning follows the word. It's a reminder that divination is partly observation, partly confidence, partly storytelling. You realize that in a world without microscopes or lab tests, this was their diagnostic toolkit. Where modern doctors peer through machines, Celtic healers peered through smoke. Where today we read blood work, they read dreams. And while accuracy may be questionable, the effect was certainty, giving patients a narrative to hold on to. There's another layer to divination. Wasn't only for sickness, it guided treatment choices. If the smoke curled left, the healer might choose herbs. If right, chants. If it coiled upward, both. The ritual gave structure to what could otherwise be chaotic guesswork. And in that structure, there was comfort. Quirky practice. Some healers even listened to the crackle of logs on the fire. The way wood snapped or popped was said to carry omens about recovery. You can imagine a healer crouched by a hearth, ears straining, declaring with great solemnity, "The wood says the child will live." Skeptics today might roll their eyes. But to the mother clutching her child, that statement carried enough power to spark hope. The hut grows hotter, smoke thicker, until you feel drowsy, lulled by the rhythm of chants. The apprentices lean against the walls, blinking heavily. The master rises, shaking out his cloak, declaring the session complete. The patient's fate, he says, has been glimpsed. The illness can be treated with herbs, with chants, with charms. As you step outside into the cool night, you notice apprentices carrying small bags tied with knotted cords, talismans for patients to wear. Divination isn't the end of healing. It flows directly into tangible objects, wearable cures meant to guard body and spirit alike. And so, your journey drifts from smoke and shadow into talismans, knots, and charms, medicine you can wear like clothing, carrying protection wherever you go. The cool night air clears your lungs as you step away from the smoky hut, but the scent of herbs lingers faintly on your clothes. Ahead, the apprentices are busy with something quieter, more delicate than chanting or reading. Their hands work with string, leather, beads, feathers, and bits of polished stone. The flicker of the fire shows half-finished charms scattered across their laps. These are not trinkets. They are talismans, medicine made wearable, protection tied into knots and loops that you can carry on your body wherever you go. A healer holds up a finished piece, a small pouch of cloth, stitched shut with red thread, bulging slightly with whatever has been tucked inside. He explains, in a calm, deliberate voice, that the pouch contains yarrow for protection, oak bark for strength, and a pinch of salt to drive away spirits. It's meant to be worn against the skin, hanging from the neck, or tied at the waist. To an outsider, it might look like a child's toy. To a Celt, it's a shield, a portable ward that keeps sickness and misfortune at bay. Knots themselves carry power. One apprentice demonstrates tying cords into intricate patterns, muttering phrases with each loop. The sickness is bound, he says, with the first knot. The spirit is tied, he says, with the second. By the third, he declares, the cure is secure. The rhythm of knotting and speaking is part of the medicine. To untie the knot later is to release the illness, letting it slip away into the world. Historians still argue whether these knots were purely symbolic or whether people believed the cord itself trapped harmful forces. Either way, the knots held meaning long after the chant had ended. Quirky tidbit: in parts of later Celtic folklore, people tied red thread around cows' horns to prevent them from falling sick, or around children's wrists to ward off fevers. The color red, bold and hard to ignore, was thought to frighten away invisible enemies. You can imagine a worried parent carefully knotting a crimson string around their child's arm, whispering, "Now the sickness will see the red and turn back." The apprentice's work isn't all knots and cloth. Some are carving symbols into small discs of wood or bone spirals, circles, and notches that carry meanings half lost to time. The spiral, in particular, seems to matter most. One carves it slowly, carefully, as if afraid to make a wrong turn. The elder reminds him that the spiral represents the journey of life, inward and outward, and that carving it is itself a ritual. To where it is to keep your spirit aligned with the eternal flow. Mainstream fact: artifacts uncovered in Celtic graves often include amulets, charms, and small personal items, suggesting they weren't just ornamental but carried protective or healing significance. Archaeologists have found beads, carved bones, and knotted cords buried alongside the dead, echoing the same belief that the spirit needed protection even beyond life. The healers also make talismans specific to certain illnesses. A toothache: wear a bead carved from animal bone near your jaw. Trouble sleeping? Place a sprig of lavender inside a pouch under your pillow. Fevers? A piece of amber tied at the throat. Some patients may have ended up clinking like walking jewelry boxes. But each charm carried intention, and intention was as valuable as medicine. You watch as one apprentice weaves feathers into a cord, explaining that they come from a cremonus perhaps, but also watchful. Another chooses deer sinew for thread, saying it carries the animal's swiftness. Every material matters. Nothing is chosen just for beauty. Each piece is stitched, tied, or carved with the belief that the essence of the plant, animal, or color will fuse with the wearer. And then there are the wearable cures that look more like everyday objects. Rings twisted from bronze wire, bracelets knotted with herbs hidden inside the braids, pendants that double as tiny containers for powders or dried leaves. To a passerby, they might seem like jewelry. To the wearer, their armor. Quirky practice. Some healers tied 9 knots into a cord and gave it to patients with persistent fevers. Each night, 1 knot would be untied while the patient recited a chant. By the 9th night, the illness was expected to loosen its grip and vanish with the final knot. Whether it worked or not, the ritual gave patients a sense of countdown, a timeline of hope, which is its own kind of medicine. The apprentices struggle with precision, their fingers fumbling at times, but their faces remain serious. They know these charms will leave the hut, worn by children, warriors, mothers, elders carried into sleep, into battle, into prayer. Every stitch, every knot is weighty. You realize how carefully the healers blend physical craft with spiritual intent. It's medicine disguised as handiwork, woven into the ordinary fabric of daily life. And there's power in portability. Unlike fire or water or chants that fade, a talisman stays with you. A mother ties one around her son's neck before he marches to war. A farmer tucks one into his belt before planting crops. A sick child clutches one while drifting into fevered dreams. Each object becomes a personal companion, a reminder that the healer's hand still rests close even when they are far away. As the last talismans are finished, the apprentices gather them in a basket. The master healer nods, satisfied. The body carries its illness everywhere, he says softly, so the cure must travel. 2. You sense in his words the philosophy of a world where healing isn't confined to moments in a hut or by a spring it walks with you, stitched into your very clothing. Outside, the night sky deepens. A group of strangers approaches the village edge traders from far-off lands. Their cloaks unfamiliar, their belts heavy with pouches. They carry new herbs, odd stones, strange mixtures never seen before. And just like that, you realize the world of Celtic healing isn't closed. It's porous, shaped by contact, borrowing and trading, absorbing what others bring. Your journey now moves toward these exchanges, strangers, trade, and borrowed potions that stretch the boundaries of tradition, pulling the Celts into a wider web of healing knowledge. The apprentices tuck their charms away just as the sound of footsteps stirs the edge of the clearing. Cloaks of heavier weave, boots dusty from long travel, and belts lined with curious pouches announce the arrival of strangers. These aren't local villagers, they are traders, wanderers, emissaries from other tribes and distant lands. Their arrival signals a subtle but important shift in Celtic healing. The moment when old practices meet new ideas, when borrowed potions and strange remedies weave themselves into the fabric of tradition. The healers greet them cautiously. Hospitality is sacred, but so is suspicion. Strangers carry knowledge, yes, but also unknown spirits. A Roman merchant once laughed that the Celts feared foreign shadows entering their groves, but you can see why. Knowledge is power, and sharing it means risking that power slipping away. Still, curiosity always outweighs fear. The healer invites the traders to sit, offering bowls of mead, and soon pouches and jars are opened. The air filling with scents, both familiar and utterly alien. One trader pulls out a bundle of dried poppy pods. The apprentices stare, some whisper that these strange flowers can lull even the fiercest pain. The healer frowns, tasting a pinch cautiously, then nods. Strong, he mutters, but dangerous. Already you sense the tension between fascination and caution. Historians still argue whether Celtic healers borrowed heavily from neighboring cultures or remained fiercely independent. Archaeological finds suggest both. Roman glass vessels in Celtic graves hint at foreign remedies. But local herbs remained dominant. Quirky tidbit: Norse visitors are said to have introduced the Celts to new ways of using seaweed, not just as food, but as poultices for wounds. Imagine the skepticism at first. You want me to smear ocean grass on a broken leg? But the salt and iodine-rich strips may well have worked as crude antiseptics. Sometimes the strangest ideas stick. The apprentices crowd closer as another trader produces a vial of resin frankincense. Perhaps brought from far-off lands through endless chains of exchange. Its scent is sharp, unfamiliar, almost dizzying. The healer burns a pinch, watching the smoke curl. He nods again, declaring it a purifier. Whether he truly understands its properties or simply recognizes its power to impress, it finds a place in his toolkit. Mainstream fact: the Celts interacted with Romans, Greeks, and even traders from the Mediterranean world. These exchanges brought not just goods, but medical knowledge. Roman physicians sometimes adopted Celtic herbs, while Celtic healers absorbed foreign ingredients. The boundary between cultures was porous, a constant back and forth of remedies and rituals. You can almost see the negotiations unfold. A trader demands a carved talisman in exchange for his resin. The healer hesitates, weighing whether a piece of his tradition is worth the foreign powder. In the end, the exchange is made. The apprentices watch closely, learning not just about herbs, but about bargaining. The way healing knowledge is never free, always earned through trade, trust, or risk. Some exchanges are stranger still. A Gaulish traveller shows how to crush garlic into a paste for infection. A Roman boasts of vinegar as a cleansing wash for wounds. The healers test, taste, and sniff, skeptical but intrigued. Over time, bits of these practices slip into the Celtic repertoire. Garlic becomes a trusted ally, vinegar a ritual wash, each one folded into chants and symbols so seamlessly that generations later, no one remembers it came from elsewhere. But there are failures too. A foreign remedy might sicken rather than cure. A healer may try it once, then discard it forever, muttering about ill spirits bound into the plant. These failures rarely stop experimentation, though. Curiosity runs too deep. The apprentices whisper about the risks, but you can see the gleam in their eyes. They know each strange vial carries the promise of something new, something that could set them apart when their turn comes to lead. The blending doesn't stop at herbs. Ideas themselves are traded. Roman physicians write of humours, balances of blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Some Celtic healers scoff, pointing out that their chants and springs work just fine without foreign theories. Others quietly adopt fragments, weaving them into their worldview. The result is a patchwork. Local traditions strengthened with imported layers, each healer choosing what to keep and what to discard. Quirky example. A tale survives of a Celtic healer who mixed Roman wine with crushed mistletoe, declaring it the marriage of two worlds. Did it heal? Hard to say. But the patient, drunk and drowsy, probably felt better either way. You realize the healers are practical above all else. They don't adopt foreign remedies because of prestige or novelty alone. They adopt what works, or at least what seems to. If a potion eases pain, if a paste stops infection, it earns its place. If not, it's abandoned. The line between tradition and innovation is flexible, bent constantly by the needs of survival. The apprentices are taught to remember not just the old, but the new. Their chants now include words borrowed from other tongues. Their pouches carry herbs whose names stumble awkwardly off their lips. Yet, with each addition, the healer reminds them, do not forget the oak, the yarrow, the willow. These are ours. Without them, the rest is noise. It's a balancing act, expansion without erasure, curiosity without forgetting roots. As the traders pack up their goods and prepare to move on, the apprentices sit quietly, digesting everything they've seen. They've learned tonight that medicine is not a closed circle. It stretches, absorbs, borrows, and reinvents. And with every exchange, its meaning deepens. The healer watches the strangers leave, his eyes narrowed, thoughtful. He knows every adoption risks change not, all of it welcome. Some in the village already mutter that too much foreign medicine feels like witchcraft, that too many borrowed potions blur the line between healer and heretic, and as the night deepens, you sense that question looming. Are these healers holy men guiding their people, or dangerous figures meddling with powers they shouldn't touch? The traders' footsteps fade into the dark, but their presence lingers like an aftertaste in the air. The apprentices whisper among themselves, some wide-eyed with excitement at the new remedies, others unsettled, and you notice the older villagers watching from a distance, their faces clouded with something heavier than curiosity. It's not just skepticism about foreign herbs, it's suspicion about the healers themselves. For all their chants, charms, and cures, The question is never far away. Are these healers holy men, or are they dabbling in something dangerous? You can feel the tension in the way people treat them. On festival nights, the healers are praised, even revered. People kiss their hands, hang on their words, trust them with the sick and the dying. But in quieter times, when illness lingers despite their efforts, whispers spread. Perhaps the healer is cursed. Perhaps he keeps sickness alive to ensure his own power. In a world where so much depends on unseen forces, faith in the healer can tip easily into fear of him. Historians still argue whether Celtic druids were primarily priests, doctors, or something more ambiguous. Roman writers, biased and suspicious, often described them as sorcerers, wielding both medicine and magic in ways that made civilized Romans uneasy. Some accounts even accused them of dark rituals, sacrifices, wrapped in healing ceremonies. Were these exaggerations meant to demonize the Celts, or kernels of truth? The debate continues, echoing the very uncertainty villagers once felt about their own healers. You imagine a scene. A healer standing over a feverish child, chanting, waving herbs, burning smoke. The child recovers within days, and the family praises him as a holy man. But in another hut, a patient dies despite the same rituals. The grieving family mutters, the healer's spirit has turned. He's chosen who lives and who dies. The same practice, interpreted as either divine blessing or sinister control, depending on the outcome. There is a quirky tidbit from later folklore. Healers were sometimes accused of stealing illnesses from one person and giving them to another. If a child grew healthy while another nearby fell ill, the healer might be blamed for transferring the sickness deliberately. To modern ears, it sounds absurd, but to the Celts, where unseen forces were real, it was a logical suspicion. After all, if a healer could drive illness out, who's to say where it went afterward? The apprentices are not blind to this tension. One asks quietly, "Master, why do some fear us?" The elder sighs, answering, "Because we walk in two worlds. To heal is to touch the unseen. And what is unseen always frightens. It's a lesson as heavy as any about herbs or chants. Their role is power, but power is dangerous." Mainstream fact. When Christianity spread into Celtic lands, the tension sharpened. Priests often condemned traditional healers as witches or pagans, accusing them of consorting with spirits rather than saints. Some healers adapted, folding Christian symbols into their practices. Others were cast out, their knowledge labeled heresy. What had once been revered became suspect, sometimes even punishable. Yet, even before Christianity's rise, the line was thin. Some villagers adored their healers as chosen by the gods, intermediaries who could speak with ancestors. Others feared they were too close to the underworld, too intimate with forces best left untouched. The healer's hut was a place of reverence by day, but a place some avoided at night, glancing nervously as they passed, as though something inside might follow them home. The apprentices themselves wrestle with this dual identity. They crave the respect that comes when a cured patient thanks them with tears. But they also see the glances, the hushed warnings not to cross them, the way children sometimes shrink back. To be a healer is to live both elevated and isolated. You can almost hear one apprentice whisper in the dark, "Will they love us when we save them, more fear us when we fail?" The truth, perhaps, is both. A healer was never simply one thing. They were holy and dangerous, trusted and doubted, revered and feared. Their chants could comfort, but their silence could terrify. Their herbs might heal, but their refusal to act could doom. To the Celtic mind, power carried its own shadow. and you can sense the shadow growing as Christianity creeps nearer. As Roman influence spreads, as old ways begin to clash with new faith, soon the healer's chants will not echo in circles of stone, but only in whispers of folklore. But not yet. For now, in this twilight between reverence and fear, the healers still gather, still chant, still tie knots and red smoke. Their rituals endure fragile, yes, but unbroken. The apprentices look toward their master, waiting for reassurance. He tells them softly, so long as a single chant remains in memory, we are not lost. His voice is firm, but his eyes betray something else, an understanding that their era is fading. The apprentices nod, unaware of just how much will be forgotten. And so, as night folds over the land once more, you sense the weight of history pressing in. The healer's role is already changing. Soon, their chants will become stories. Their charms will become superstition, their identity rewritten as either witchcraft or myth. All that will remain are echoes, forgotten chants, lingering faintly in the air, waiting to fade. The tension of suspicion lingers like smoke, but the story doesn't end there. You follow the healers one last time into the quiet dark, where the forest seems older, heavier, as though holding its breath. The moon is a thin sliver now, barely lighting the path. The apprentices trail silently, their earlier chatter gone. They know, as you do, that the practices you've witnessed, the chants, the herbs, the fires, the water, the charms are approaching their twilight. These are the last echoes of a world that will soon fade. The healers gather at a grove of ancient oaks. Their branches twist overhead, gnarled and vast, sheltering the clearing like cathedral arches. A fire is kindled, but it's small this time, almost symbolic, its flames licking low as if aware of the weight of the moment. Around it, the healers chanted loudly, not with the commanding force of festivals, but softly, almost like a hum meant for themselves. The apprentices kneel, listening, imprinting the rhythm deep in their memory. This chant is different. It isn't for a patient, nor for cattle, nor even for the community. It's for preservation. The words roll slowly, like waves, a deliberate attempt to anchor memory against the tide of change. You realize that this is how traditions survive, not written, not carved, but carried in voices from one generation to the next. The apprentices lean forward, mouths moving silently, repeating without sound so they don't forget. Historians still argue whether Celtic chants were ever transcribed before being suppressed, or whether they survived only as fragments in folklore. The truth is murky. What is clear is that the majority were lost, vanishing as Christianity took root and old practices were condemned as superstition. What you're hearing now, the whisper-soft chant around the dying fire, may be the closest anyone gets to those original voices. A quirky tidbit survives in later tales. Villagers sometimes claimed that, on certain nights, if you sat by ancient stones or wells, you could still hear faint chanting in the wind. Was it imagination, or the lingering memory of long-dead healers? Perhaps both. Either way, the idea that the earth itself held on to their voices reflects how deeply their presence was felt. The apprentices look uncertain, sensing the end of something bigger than themselves. One asks the master, will these chants be remembered when we are gone? The elder pauses, gazing into the small fire. Perhaps, he says. But if not, the land will remember. The stones, the rivers, the trees, they hold what we cannot. His words are calm, but there's sadness beneath them. Even he knows memory fades. Mainstream fact, many Celtic healing practices were absorbed into Christian rituals. Holy wells became saints' wells. Charms were rebranded as relics, chants replaced with prayers. The form shifted, but the skeleton of the old ways remained, hidden beneath new robes. In that sense, the healers were never entirely erased. They were rewritten. You close your eyes and listen. The chant blends with the crackle of the fire, the rustle of leaves, the sigh of wind through the oaks. For a moment, you can almost believe the master is right. Maybe the land does remember. Maybe every puff of smoke, every drip of spring water, every stone circle still carries faint traces of these lost rituals, waiting for someone to listen closely enough. The fire dims, collapsing into embers. The apprentices bow their heads. The master raises his hand, then lets it fall. The chant ends. Silence presses in, vast and final. You know this is the last time these rituals will be performed as they once were, whole and unbroken. Tomorrow they will begin to fade into fragments, whispers, and eventually folklore. And yet, the moment is not mournful, it's tender, almost peaceful. The healers have done their work. Their knowledge, fragile though it is, will ripple outward in unseen ways, in the prayers whispered over wells, in the knots tied on children's wrists, in the lullabies sung to restless patience. Pieces will survive, hidden in plain sight. As you stand to leave, the apprentices look at you with eyes that are both anxious and hopeful. They know the weight of what they've inherited. They also know that time is against them. But in this clearing, under these oaks, their voices still carry. For tonight, the chants are alive. The path ahead is quiet. The last echo of forgotten chants trails after you, fading gently into the night. The embers fade, the night deepens, and you feel the rhythm of the journey slowing. The healers' voices no longer echo. Instead, there is only the soft chorus of the forest wind brushing leaves, distant owls calling, the faint hum of insects. Everything begins to stretch into a slower tempo, as though the world itself exhales and tells you to rest. You think of the fires that once roared, now reduced to warm coals. The smoke that once curled skyward, now a faint memory on your clothes. The chants that once filled stone circles, now lingering like the tail end of a lullaby. Each image softens, each detail blurs, until they're less history and more dream. The healers, the apprentices, the rituals all still here, but drifting farther away, as though they're dissolving into mist. Your breath slows without effort, in and out, just as the healers once matched their voices to the rise and fall of the chest. Your body now sinks naturally with the quiet around you. The rhythm steadies, the weight of the day loosens, and your shoulders begin to settle. The oaks overhead sway gently, their branches rocking like cradles. The ground beneath feels steady, timeless, almost protective. You realize the healer's final lesson wasn't in chants or herbs, but in this trusting the rhythm of the world, letting yourself be carried by it rather than resisting. Everything narrows now. The details of the story fade, leaving only impressions. The warmth of fire, the cool of water, the hum of voices, the whisper of wind. And then even those impressions thin into quiet. The night holds you, calm and steady. You are safe. You are resting. You are already halfway to sleep.